All right, welcome back to Blue by 90. I'm Justin, joined by Tanner today, and we've got another special guest here, our friend Isaiah Hull from Locked On Wolverines. Isaiah, appreciate you joining us today, man.
Of course, my pleasure. I'm amazed that this is the first time. We've known each other for years, and
I know.
we're doing it. We've worked together in multiple facets.
I was going to say, we've worked together in a lot of different ways with a lot of different things, but you definitely are one of our favorites out on the Michigan beat, so appreciate you joining for sure. And hey, we've got football this week. So there's been a lot of talk. I tweeted it out last night. Like, I can't wait for football to actually be on in a Michigan uniform so we can stop talking about all the stuff that's gone on this season, including the notice of allegations that came out on Sunday and everything. So I'm just, we'll talk a little bit about that here, but
you don't want to get into this new rumor set up on a Texas board about it involving
just read that,
mob and all of these different.
I did see you. I saw you quote tweet it, and it was go ahead with what it was, because it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
I actually want to just go in and read part of it, because it is every single fever dream rumor that rival fans have had is included in this, and it's amazing. So it says, I've been hearing a bit of everything from postseason bans, vacated wins over multiple seasons, huge financial penalties, strip titles, scholarship reductions, show causes for multiple coaches, including for the head coach, etc. Who knows for sure, but here's what we do know. They are considered repeat offenders on a number of these charges, like recruiting violations. I'd go try to cover up 52 text messages from investigators. There's some very credible gambling issues they have to deal with, which then leads to wire fraud. So I don't know, but I can tell you it's much worse than they had on USC, who got hit fairly hard. OSU and other Big Ten schools want blood because of Michigan's previous penalties, so on and so forth. Continues, Jay Harbaugh is the one who introduced the big scheme to a big Michigan booster who funded the operation. Now, if you think of how sophisticated the sign stealing op was and you start relating it to gambling on games by big boosters, it gets very serious. And then there's an add-on here. It says, the money trail also leads to big money laundering scheme out of Detroit, which is where the Feds got involved in all of this. It's the type where people end up in bags. It's wow. You want this to stop? It's only getting better. We are an inch away from the plot of the next Mission Impossible movie here.
Which is very rich coming from Texas fans, as if the state of Texas has their fair share of fraudulent activities among various different Enron comes to mind, and it's just rich coming from them. They're the cleanest program in NCAA football history. So
every program's the cleanest aside from the ones that you hate.
Right, exactly.
Everyone cheats with Michigan. That's still in my head.
Yes,
I mean Michigan is pretty clean compared to a lot of others, but it's in general, it's college football.
It is an inherently dirty sport, at its core. From the inception, from getting ringers to play back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there have been nefarious acts going on all across college football. So it's very funny to see people clutch their pearls, as we've lost Justin on the video, unfortunately. But it's always interesting to see people get up in arms over this stuff when it's and I don't even know all this. And Isaiah, you've got a better idea than me, but I can only imagine what goes on in this sport 365 days a year, because it's the most absurd thing, and that's why we all love it.
I think Justin just wanted to recuse himself ultimately, but it's he's like, I'm
here, I think, but
you're here on audio. We have you on audio.
There we go.
But it's just funny, when it made it into John U. Bacon's book that Clemson offered Rashawn Gary $100,000 a year, and that was a rumor that I had heard back the day that he signed, before he signed even, on signing day. And no one bat an eye at it. It was just oh, that silly Clemson. They're out there doing what they're doing. So it's just funny. And I don't love conflict in general. It's as someone who is very much a Christian and was raised in like Christian schools in the churches and everything, like I only like conflict when it's necessary, right? Like I won't shy away from it, but I don't love it, when you see people kind of cheering on this stuff, yeah, it's kind of like, no, can we just end this? But at the same time, when you've got this type of material to work with, it's kind of like, you know what, I'm not mad at it. You're coming up with these things. Next, it's going to be like, well, how long before the president of the United States ends up getting included in like this sign stealing scheme rumor mill that has been going on? Like we're an inch away from it being like, you don't understand. There was this big war between Putin and Biden, and Biden directed Jim Harbaugh. Like it's going to end up getting to that point.
I mean, Gerald Ford, Michigan alum, right?
Exactly.
So how deep does it truly run, Isaiah? That's what the people want to know.
There's a pit somewhere, I think, in the state of Washington. It's like a bottomless pit. Like it goes like miles down. I think it's probably deeper than that. What's in that pit and what don't we know about it? That's the big thing. What are they hiding from us?
You know what? I bet if we needed to, we could get with Buckeye Scoop and he would get to the bottom of it right after he cheats in fantasy football and whatever other things that he does, but he will find it and figure it out.
He's already done it, really. I mean, he's just waiting for the powers that be in the NCAA to start releasing these things.
So we will play football on Saturday, despite what a lot of people are talking about, that the death penalty is coming any day now for Michigan football. But before Saturday, there is a documentary coming out on Netflix about our friend Connor Stalions, and it is confirmed that you are in said documentary. So wanted to talk a little bit about that. I know you and I have talked a little bit about behind the scenes about some of that stuff, and I guess, what is the general gist of this documentary that's coming out, and how is it going to paint Michigan in your eyes?
The general gist is this is finally Connor Stalions. His voice is going to be heard by people other than those who know him personally for the first time, and you're going to get to hear his side of the story. It doesn't go unchecked. This isn't Swamp Kings. It isn't a scenario where it's just like, well, that's good enough for me, but you're going to get his side of the story. And when you think about the fact that it's only really been like outlets like, ours that, and then you can maybe include like Rich Eisen pushing back on the narrative that's been set up from the beginning from the NCAA. So this is the first time that we're really seeing the other side from like kind of a bigger national perspective. So I think that's mostly what you're going to get. I think Michigan fans will really like it if they, at this point, if they haven't watched it already. I mean, it doesn't really tell you, as one of the things that Connor often said to me before I saw it was, I don't think like people are necessarily going to learn anything new if you've been paying attention, especially Michigan fans. But it does, there is the little bit of the balance, and you're going to hear some of the things that maybe not quite to the same level as President Gerald Ford rose from the grave to collude with Jim Harbaugh to create the greatest operation in mankind in sign stealing. But you don't quite get that, but it's you do get a little bit of the counter narrative in there. And but ultimately, I think it makes Michigan look good. And I think Connor comes across as likable in it, maybe a bit football obsessed, but I mean, who in college football isn't, Well, I guess there's a few. Lane Kiffin's probably not that football obsessed, but
right.
Like generally big time college football, everyone involved is pretty, like that's their life, and that's their livelihood, and that's the thing that they care about the most. And you kind of see a little bit more of what into it. It doesn't necessarily fully exonerate Michigan, but it does above Connor, certainly, but it doesn't necessarily. You don't walk away from it being like nothing happened. It's just kind of, you have to decide what that NCAA bylaw 1161, was it violated? And a lot of people believe it was, and they kind of make the argument somewhat that it wasn't, at least through Connor and his lawyers. But you just see the whole story. And I think what's fun about it is it's not only do you get to like learn about his childhood and certain things of like that, but it takes place in the backdrop of the 2023 season. So you kind of get to relive that a little bit. But certainly, I mean, some of the rumors out there they're given a little bit more than a wink and a nod. So I think that part's fun too. So it's definitely a must watch, I think, for college football fans, certainly for Michigan fans, without question. And it will be. I would imagine it's going to be watched by everybody at this point. Not the good news is Sarah saw it yesterday with me. She knows nothing about football. She's been on the sidelines with me before. She still doesn't know what a touchdown is. And yet she still walked away and said that was thoroughly enjoyable.
Let me just respond to Isaiah real quick. In my thoughts there, Isaiah, is I don't think that there are any rational Michigan fans out there that are like, Michigan didn't do anything wrong at all, right? Like, I think that most rational, average Michigan fans, now there might be some crazies for sure. There's crazies in every facet of life. But I think most Michigan fans are sitting here being like, all right, were there some rules at the very least bent to a 90-degree angle, right? Or like taken from 0 to 100, right? That's probably what happened here. Also, at the same time, was this story completely blown out of proportion? And was it just completely misguided by the media? Also, yes. So I think, is that kind of what you're trying to say, where it's like Michigan's not going to be exonerated. We're not going to paint Connor Stalions as completely innocent or Michigan as completely innocent, but what it is going to do is shed some light on the situation as a whole and maybe bring it back to earth in terms of here's what really happened and how far it really went.
I do believe that's. I say I do believe as if I haven't seen the thing 4 times, but that is really it. And I mean, how much will those outside of the rival fan bases take a step back and say like, oh, okay. I think that will remain to be seen. We'll find that out, but certainly like you're going to at least understand what's a little bit more about sign stealing. They could have gone deeper. And you'll find out a little bit about like the NCAA's process, like getting to see an NCAA investigation actually happening in process, like an actual interview. That's something that we've never seen before. That said, I mean, there's parts that I know probably should have been included that weren't. I could not speak to Netflix and its decision making as far as like what parts were included, but it also kind of lets you know like college football is dirtier than people want to think, in the sense of like they really lead you to believe like there's other nefarious things that were surrounding this, and which is something I've been saying from the beginning. Right. And it's no secret now at this point that I've been talking obviously to multiple people, but to Connor Stalions throughout this entire process, the only one that was at least for a couple months. And there were a lot of things where it was like, okay, how did this investigation start to begin with? And a lot of people are like, think that it's like the Houston Astros on steroids and all of these things. And it's kind of like, well, first you have to understand what sign stealers do. Secondly, is Connor the only one that was out there doing this? And they'll lead you down some different paths in this. So I think it will certainly change the hearts and minds of some people. It will harden the hearts and minds of rival fans who will certainly decry it as propaganda and all of these different things. Never mind that the director of this was someone who had no affiliation to Michigan or Connor. He's played football at Kansas. And there's national writers in here and all of that, but I think it's certainly going to have an impact one way or the other. And I think the timing of it also with the NOA coming in, Netflix announces that this is coming out, and then the NCAA drops the NOA draft, which is never really a thing, right? Like you often aren't talking about an NOA draft. And then you get 36 hours from the release of this, and then they, in the fastest fashion ever, go from draft to final product and issue that to Michigan. That's not a coincidence. They certainly want to be ahead of the narrative. So I'm curious to see just kind of if people can see through that more after watching this.
Well, Isaiah, I was going to ask too, are we just going to get everything leaked beforehand and just know this entire process inside and out from the NCAA's perspective? Because it's like clockwork at this point. I'm surprised it wasn't a particular person at ESPN that released it or broke the news. But it just, I don't, how can they continue to break their own rules time after time after time again?
They respect the integrity of the process. They said that yesterday, and I'm going to take them at their word. It's a organization that's always been above board, never has had any agendas. They never turn a blind eye towards anything, right? They really are all about the student athlete and player safety and all of those things. And they just really care and love about the integrity of the game. And so I think the leaks were all, any leaks that happened, that was for the good of the game, essentially, and the good of the process. You have to break the integrity of the process to respect the integrity of the process. So,
yeah. 100%.
I think we got to be getting past leaks to some point, because this is kind of wrapping it up. But I'm just excited for just the actual leak of the NOA, because you see all of these fun Twitter accounts. That the one thing about Elon Musk taking over Twitter and having the For You page on Twitter is, like, I see accounts that I never would have seen otherwise, and I see them daily.
It's the worst.
Buckeye Scoop, MSU Daily, all of these, and it's the worst, but it's also the best. And just, they didn't leak the actual NOA because what's in it's 10 times worse. It's like, bro, that's not how that works. Like, just use a moment of logic on top of this, like the fact that that's just not true. So, the NCAA is awesome. That's to summarize my point. And I think most people are in agreement. It's just a vital organization that's needed in the state of college football right now. And we just, defer to our overlords to tell us what's next.
So I think one question I want to ask you too is, this is, whether it's part of the documentary or just an overall bigger question, is like, okay, you see people that you definitely have like a peek behind the curtains of what college athletics is like, right? I have a little bit of that too. I know, Tanner a little bit as well, and just the people that we know. And to your point from earlier, like, it's not all about these kids and all rainbows and everything that the NCAA would like you to think, right? And so my question to you is, where does the sign stealing saga, where does that land in terms of what, like, how dirty is that compared to other things that other programs are doing out there, whether it be in recruiting, whether it be in tampering, whether it be in just, whatever it is, right? Where do you see this stack up against other things, similar to the Clemson thing with Rashawn Gary that you mentioned? Where is this at?
It's kind of hard to quantify, because I guess it's like, what is every program doing? Most every program has a sign stealer. And Michigan didn't for the longest time. And really, this operation, I'm not talking about Connor and his vast network. I'm just meaning the operation of having a sign stealer didn't exist in the first several years of Jim Harbaugh. And Connor, this is something I'm talking about on my podcast as well. Like, I just so happened to be on the flight down to Orlando for the Citrus Bowl in 2019. Connor was on my flight because he flew in for the holidays, and he left a day late so he could spend time with his family. And our flight got delayed. So at that time, I heard like his frustrations as someone who had stolen signs at Navy, to like the fact that, you know, Michigan wasn't doing that. Michigan, you know, wasn't changing up their signs. They weren't making it difficult for other teams to steal their signs. And that's really defensively in particular where Michigan kind of got. If you're in a situation like that Michigan was in at that time with Don Brown, he was the one signaling things in. He didn't have a lot of signals. He never changed things up. And your defense from a schematic standpoint is relatively simple, as his was, then suddenly it's kind of like it's a massive advantage if you're another team. If you have a little bit more complexity to things, especially from a schematic standpoint, then it's not necessarily. I think the thing about it is that you still have to defend these plays one way or the other, right? Like if you're sign stealing on off, you know, defensively to for the sake of your defense of another team's offense, you still have to be able to stop the thing that's coming, right? Like how many times had you seen, in particularly Urban Meyer's Ohio State, before Ryan Day became the offensive coordinator? It was like they were just running the same arc read play over and over again. You knew what was coming and you just couldn't stop it. Michigan in 2021 against Ohio State. That's the irony of like kind of their complaining. You knew what Michigan was running pretty much every play in the second half. You knew where the ball was going. You knew what gap it was going to. You still have to be able to stop it. So because of that, I think that it has a different varying degree. It matters a lot if you are very simplistic in your schematic design. As in the opponents, if you're very simplistic as far as that's concerned, it can matter a lot, but probably not as much as it matters about like getting like a couple 5-star recruits that you weren't otherwise going to get, right? Like, because you win with players, and yes, you have to develop and all of these things, right. But if you were on your own going to get like 10 4-stars and 14 3-stars, but instead you ended up getting 3 5-stars and 20 4-stars and 1 3-star. I mean, that's a much bigger difference than sign stealing. And so I think like when it comes to, I mean, even with recruiting violations, it's interesting because like giving a guy a shirt, which is one of the things that's like Michigan's accused of here, that, you know, that does that compare to giving a guy a bag of cash, which has long been the thing, or what NIL, like the difference between what NIL was supposed to be. And obviously, you know what it's supposed to be, you know, Justin, but like the difference between what it's supposed to be and what it kind of has become, like that's that, you know, if you're operating with this, like, yeah, NIL, here's $100,000, or here's now it's actually, that's like a low end, like here's $1 million, you know, just keep doing what you're doing, you know, like, that plays a much bigger factor, because if you have like a game changer, you know, a guy that, you know, let me put it this way. People love to act with in the aftermath of the game against TCU, like, because Sonny Dykes said, oh, we changed our signs, LOL. They didn't, like, their signs were still figured out in that game, right? Jesse Minter had things dialed up in that game. There were so many times that Max Duggan was halfway to the ground and he got rid of the football, ends up in Quentin Johnson's hands, touchdown, right? Like, you still have to be able to execute. And if the better players you have, one way or the other, I mean, Max Duggan wasn't like a 5-star, but the better players you have, that's going to play a much bigger difference. So I think that's the best way that I can put that.
So I wanted to make this point real quick. So Isaiah, it sounds like, you know, we've seen the before and after 2021 graphic, you know, ad nauseum. Shout out Trent A. Jones. I loved his edit on that graphic. But it sounds like Michigan really just got modern. You know, they went from Don Brown running man 90% of the time, and, you know, he's the one signaling in the calls. There's only so many things you can do with your hands, you know, with signaling and coverages. So they went to be a little bit more diverse in their signs and their coverages, and the fact that they had an NFL defensive coordinator, now a head coach, and then another NFL defensive coordinator. It seems like they just leveled the field, and then they won the championship. So it's just interesting to think about it from that perspective.
Yeah, I wrote a long piece on it because people like, you know, what changed between 2020 and 2021? I'm like, well, They broomed the entire defensive staff. They broomed half of the offensive staff. They brought in all of these different guys. They had a new starting quarterback that was more, just took care of the football better. The offensive line took a big step up in terms of its toughness under Sharon Moore instead of Ed Warner. Ed Warner was actually pretty good, but they took like a big step forward. You've got had a defensive coordinator who's now an NFL head coach. Like, he didn't get the NFL head coaching job because he knew other teams' signs, because they don't do signs in the NFL. Like, maybe the scheme has a little something to do with it. He was running a scheme at Michigan that obviously was led by Wink Martindale, who's now the defensive coordinator. At the time, in coming out of 2020, Wink Martindale was considered to be the best defensive coordinator in college football. So you basically had a confluence of players who were able to run schemes that were better suited for the defense, for their skill set, an offense that finally had like an actual identity, a quarterback that wasn't injured like Shea Patterson was in 2019, and like a coaching staff that just was a lot more diverse and good at what they did. There were a ton of changes. And on top of it, you had players that were high-end players that were sick of losing. Aiden Hutchinson ends up being the number 2 pick. Like, if it was all because of the signs, he would be struggling in the NFL right now, which he's not. So, I mean, there's just plenty of evidence that goes beyond anecdotal that kind of shows you that the changes that, like, yeah, sure, sign stealing was part of it. Modernizing was part of it, but so were like 18 other things.
I agree. I mean, there's just a lot more to everything than just this. Although, of course, our rivals want to hyper focus on this. So Isaiah, I know you got to go. So I appreciate you for jumping on with us here quickly and just going through this. I'm looking forward to seeing your beautiful face on the Netflix doc tomorrow too.
It was awesome getting to just break down the entire roster of the team, really just delving into the football position by position. I think I shed a lot of light on that, and I think we are all a lot smarter.
I can't believe that you leaked the starting quarterback, Isaiah. That is so bold of you, and we appreciate it.
Who would have thought that Kenneth Grant was switching over from defensive tackle to be the guy throwing the football around? But you know what? We've seen him move. Hard to take down.
We have. I like it. Well, we'll have you on again soon where we actually can talk about some football, because football is happening this Saturday here. But we know you got to run, so we appreciate you, Isaiah Holt. Tell them real quick where everybody can find you and go read your stuff.
Written word is at wolverineswire.usatoday.com. I'm literally the only one there now. So it's just me. Anything you get there is pretty much me, or like some AI things are written, I guess, not AI, but like outside outlets, I guess. And Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Awesome, man.
Love
Thank
it.
you so much
All
for coming on.